The forest does not ask questions. It does not demand to know why I am here, without my crown, without my court, without the 7 moons of Velarath rising behind my name the way they always did. It simply accepts me. The trees here are wrong, too short, too brown, not the silver-spired Arith wood I grew up beneath, not the glowing canopy of the Thavari Highlands where I spent the first 19 years of my life believing I was loved. I was wrong about the love. I was not wrong about the trees. The trees of this planet are exactly what they appear to be. I have come to appreciate honesty like that. My name is Saravin Vel, 3rd daughter of the High Sovereign of the Velarath Confederation, chosen heir to the Thavari seat, commander-designate of the Outer Reach Fleet. All of those things were stripped from me in the span of one sentence, spoken by the man I called father, in front of his full court, with every eye in the galaxy watching through the transmission feeds. You are no longer my daughter. You are no longer Velarath. Leave, and do not return until you have learned what it means to be nothing. I learned. I have been nothing for 63 days. And then, on the 64th morning, I heard something moving through the trees that did not belong here. Something that walked upright. Something that breathed too loud, stepped too heavy, and smelled like metal and something warm underneath it. Something human. I should have run. I didn't run. That is where this story becomes complicated. Let me tell you what I took with me when I left. Nothing. That was the point of it, I think, the public humiliation of it. My father is a master of spectacle. He did not simply strip my titles and cast me out. He made certain everyone watched the stripping. Every ambassador, every court noble, every soldier who had ever saluted me, every advisor who had ever bowed. They all watched me walk out of the Thavari throne hall with nothing but the clothes on my back and the emergency beacon clipped to my wrist. Because even my father was not cruel enough to let me die, only cruel enough to make me wish I could. The beacon was keyed to a single frequency, one planet, one location. I understood the message without needing it spoken. Go here, be forgotten, be nothing. Perhaps in time I will call you home again. Or perhaps not. The planet was called Earth. I had studied it briefly in my early education. A small, unremarkable world in an unremarkable system, populated by a species that was young enough to be naive and old enough to be dangerous. They had not yet made formal contact with any of the Confederation worlds. They believed, most of them, that they were alone. They were not alone. They were simply not interesting enough yet for anyone to bother telling them. I arrived at night, which was fortunate. My pod made a sound like a dying star and left a crater in the middle of a forest in the northern hemisphere. If I had landed anywhere else, in one of their cities, near their roads, I would have been found immediately. Instead, trees, silence, cold. I spent the first 3 days doing nothing but surviving. Water was the first problem. I found a stream on the 2nd day, after following the sound of it through the undergrowth, moving with all the grace of someone who had spent their life on palace floors and spacecraft decks and nothing in between. I slipped twice, tore my sleeve on a branch, sat at the edge of the stream for a long time before I drank because I did not know if the water was safe and I did not have anything to test it with. Eventually I drank. I did not die. I took this as a small victory. Food came next. I had enough baseline biological knowledge to identify edible plants from my general xenobiology studies. Earth flora was included in the comprehensive curriculum for diplomatic cadets, which I had completed at 17 with top marks. None of that knowledge had ever felt important before. It felt very important now. By the end of the first week, I had established a rudimentary shelter, a linta built against a large rock formation, constructed from fallen branches and packed with dry leaves for insulation. It was not comfortable. It was functional. I told myself functional was enough. My skin was a problem. Velarath physiology includes bioluminescent patches along the cheekbones, the shoulders, and the backs of the hands. They pulse in patterns that reflect emotional state, like a second language written in light. On Velarath, this is normal, expected, beautiful even. On Earth, standing in a dark forest, glowing faintly gold blue when I was frightened and silver white when I was calm, it was a liability. I learned to keep myself calm. It was the hardest thing I had done since the throne hall. Calmer than I had felt in years, actually, because the forest did not care who I was. The forest did not have a political agenda. The trees did not expect anything from me. The animals, small things, brown and quick, with black eyes that watched me without judgment, simply existed alongside me in a way that nothing in my life ever had. I had been surrounded by expectation since the moment I was born. The silence was, in some ways, a relief. In other ways, it was devastating. I will not pretend otherwise. There were nights I pressed my back against the rock and looked up through the canopy at the wrong stars, Earth's constellations, not mine, not the ones I grew up naming, and I felt the weight of 60 million light years like a physical thing on my chest. I thought about my father. I thought about what I had done to earn this. I thought about whether it had truly been worth it, standing up in that throne hall, in front of all those eyes, and telling him the truth about what I had discovered. And then I thought, yes. Even now, even here. Yes, it was worth it. Because the alternative was to stay silent, and I had seen what staying silent cost. I had seen it in my mother's eyes for 19 years. I had watched her smile at my father's lies so perfectly that even I had believed them once. I would not become that. Not for a throne, not for a title, not for any number of silver-spired trees. So I stayed in the forest. I learned the shapes of the seasons changing. I made peace slowly with the wrong stars. And on the 64th morning, I heard footsteps. The footsteps were not careful. That was the first thing I registered. Whoever was moving through the trees was not attempting to be quiet. They were moving with the particular heaviness of someone who either did not know they were being watched or did not care. And the sound of their progress through the underbrush was so unlike the delicate padding of the forest animals I had grown accustomed to that I was on my feet before I fully understood why. Old instincts. Combat training. Third daughter of a high sovereign, remember, I had 12 years of defensive curriculum before I ever set foot in a diplomatic hall. I pressed myself against the far side of the rock formation and waited. The figure that emerged from the tree line was not what I expected. I had studied Earth humans academically. I had seen photographs, educational footage, the occasional intercepted transmission. I knew their general morphology: bipedal, bilateral symmetry, soft-skinned, no bioluminescence, no secondary eyelids, startlingly fragile by most galactic standards. Academic knowledge and standing 3 meters from one of them were, it turned out, very different things. He was tall, taller than I anticipated for the species average, though I would later learn he was not unusually tall by his own people's standards. Dark hair, uncut and slightly unkempt. A jacket that had clearly been repaired at the elbow more than once. He was carrying something, a pack over one shoulder, and in his hands, a notebook and a pen. He was not a soldier. He was not a search party. He was, and I did not understand this immediately, writing something down. He stopped at the edge of the small clearing where I had set up my shelter, and looked at the linta with an expression I could not parse from a distance. Then he looked at the remnants of my cooking fire. Then he looked at the carved wooden markers I had placed around the perimeter, a habit from my survival training, boundary indicators, meaningless to anyone who hadn't been taught the system. Then he looked directly at where I was hiding. I did not move. His eyes, dark, deep-set, slow-moving, swept across the rock formation with the careful attention of someone who was looking, not glancing. "I know someone's there," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. Not a shout, not an accusation, more like a statement of fact offered to the air, the way you might say it looks like rain or the fire is going out. I said nothing. "I've been coming to this forest for 6 years," he continued, still in that same quiet tone. "I know every trail, every clearing, every place animals den. That Linta wasn't there 3 weeks ago. That fire pit wasn't there 3 weeks ago." A pause. Neither were those markers. Still, I said nothing. "I'm not going to report you," he said. "I'm not whatever you're afraid of, I'm not it." And then he did something unexpected. He sat down. Just sat down in the middle of the clearing, cross-legged on the ground, and opened his notebook and began to write. As if he had all the time in the world. As if he was simply going to wait me out. I stayed behind the rock for a very long time. He kept writing. Eventually, and I am still not entirely certain what compelled me, whether it was the 64 days of isolation or something more specific about the quality of his patience, I stepped out from behind the rock. He did not startle, did not jump, did not reach for anything. He just looked up, and his expression when he saw me was complicated. I watched it move through several phases in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been wonder, and then settling like water, going still, careful neutrality. Deliberate. Chosen. He was trying not to frighten me. That small calculation, that tiny act of awareness, I registered it the way you register unexpected warmth when you've been cold for a long time. "Hi," he said. A greeting, simple, undemanding. I had not spoken aloud in 64 days. My voice, when it came, was rougher than I expected. "Hello." His eyes moved just briefly, just a flicker, to my face, to the bioluminescent patches along my cheekbones. They were glowing silver-white, calm, or my body's best approximation of calm given the circumstances. I watched him process this, the not-quite-human face, the 2 bright eyes, the light that had no business being there, and I waited for the fear response. The species literature was clear on how humans tended to react to the unexpected and inexplicable. He looked back down at his notebook. "Wrote something." "Okay," he said quietly, and that was it, just okay. Like he had simply filed the information away, and decided it did not require immediate action. Like he was, I would later come to understand, exactly the kind of person who had always moved through the world this way, taking things as they came, sitting with uncertainty instead of running from it, writing things down so he wouldn't lose them. His name, he told me, slowly, carefully, the way you introduce yourself to someone who might need a moment, was Eli. Eli Marin, 28 years old. He came to the forest every week to write. It was the only place, he said, where the noise in his head went quiet. I understood that more than he could know. "I'm Saravin," I told him. "That's a beautiful name," he said, without hesitation, without the slight awkward pause most people gave before deciding how to respond to an unfamiliar sound. I felt something in my chest shift. Just slightly, just a degree. "Thank you," I said. We sat in the clearing until the light changed. He did not ask me to explain myself. I did not offer. When he left, he said, "I'll be back next week, same day." A statement, not a question, not an offer, a simple declaration of intent offered without attachment, without expectation of response. I watched him walk back into the trees until the sound of his footsteps faded. And then I stood in the clearing for a long time, looking at the place where he had been. He came back. Of course he came back. He had said he would, and I would learn, over the weeks that followed, that Eli Marin was a man who meant what he said. Not because he lacked imagination or the capacity for change, but because He had a particular relationship with honesty that I recognized, having been raised in a court where honesty was the rarest currency of all. He didn't ask me what I was on that second visit. He didn't ask on the third. He brought a second cup of coffee on the fourth, handed it to me without comment, watched my face as I tasted it for the first time, and at my involuntary expression of bewilderment at the bitterness, he laughed. Not unkindly, freely. I had not heard a free laugh in a long time. "It's an acquired taste," he said. "How does your species continue to acquire it willingly?" I asked, "when the initial taste is this aggressive?" He laughed again. I ask myself that every morning. It became a ritual, the coffee, the clearing, the notebook. He wrote. I watched the trees. Sometimes I asked what he was writing. Sometimes he read me pieces of it, fragmented, unpolished things, images assembled from his observations of the forest, nothing like the formal poetry of the Velarath High Court, nothing with structure or meter or political subtext. Just the specific way the light hits the creek on cold mornings, the sound of wind moving through leaves just before the temperature drops, the feeling of sitting somewhere long enough that the forest forgets you're not part of it. I thought about that last one for a very long time. On the sixth visit, it rained. He produced an emergency poncho from his pack with the ease of someone who had been caught in this forest's rain before, and without any discussion, he unfolded it and held it over both of us, which required him to sit considerably closer than he had been. We sat like that for an hour and a half while the rain came down. I was aware of the warmth of him in a way that was scientifically understandable, higher baseline body temperature than Velarath species, close proximity, shared shelter, and also in a way that was harder to categorize. "You can trust me, you know," he said quietly during the rain, not pushing. Just placing it there, the way you put something down that someone can pick up when they're ready. "I know," I said. And I did know. That was the unexpected part. I was not a person who trusted easily. I had been raised in a court of calculated kindness, and I had been taught, mostly by watching, what happened to people who offered trust carelessly. But there was something about Eli that did not read as a threat. Not because he was harmless. I had been trained to assess threat response, and I could see that he was not fragile, not soft in any dangerous sense, but because his interest in me was clean. It did not want anything from me. It did not need me to be anything other than what I was. I had been wanted for my title, my bloodline, my political utility, my face on a succession document. No one had ever simply wanted my company. I told him on the 8th visit that I was not from Earth. I said it plainly, without preamble, the way he had said I know someone's there on the very first day. He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. I looked at him. "The bioluminescence," he said, "is not something that exists in any Earth species. I looked it up. There's no medical condition that explains it either. And you," he paused, choosing his words with care, "you orient to the sky differently than I do, like you're looking for something that should be there and isn't." I felt the back of my throat tighten. "Yes," I said. "Do you want to tell me about it?" And I found, to my surprise, that I did. I told him about Velarath, about the silver-spired Arith wood in the 7 moons, about my father, the High Sovereign, and the throne hall in the 64 days. I told him what I had discovered, the thing that had earned me my exile. My father had been falsifying trade records with the Outer Reach colonies for 11 years, redirecting resources, keeping entire populations in managed scarcity because it made them easier to govern, easier to keep loyal, easier to maintain as a dependent bloc rather than a genuinely thriving one. I had found the evidence by accident, in files I was not supposed to be reviewing yet, during my transition into the commander-designate role. I had taken the evidence to him directly. I had believed, despite everything I had observed over 19 years, that he would want to know. that the instinct of a father, of a leader, would be to correct the wrong. He had looked at me for a long time. Then he had called the court into session. Eli listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for several moments. "What will you do," he asked, "when he calls you home?" "If," I said. He looked at me steadily. "When?" I looked away. "I don't know," I said. "I don't know who I am without the titles, without the court, without the—" I stopped. I thought I knew what I stood for. I thought that was enough. But standing for something, it turns out, is significantly easier when you have somewhere to stand. "You have somewhere to stand," Eli said quietly. "You've been standing in this forest for 2 months. You built shelter. You learned the water sources. You kept yourself alive with no resources and no help." He paused. "That's not nothing, Saravan. That's actually quite a lot." My bioluminescence, I realized, when I looked down at my hands, had shifted from its calm silver white to something I had almost never seen on myself before. Pale gold, warm. On Velarath, that was the color of feeling seen. I had not felt seen in 19 years. The weeks continued. I learned the rhythms of Eli's life in fragments, the way you piece together a language from context, the job he kept odd hours for research, something involving long stretches of reading followed by long stretches of writing, which he had described once as organized arguing with other people's arguments. The apartment in the city that he visited less and less as the weeks went on. The family he rarely mentioned except obliquely, always with a particular careful neutrality that I recognized as the voice of someone who had long ago decided which wounds were worth reopening. He learned mine in similar fragments. The names of Velarath constellations, which I drew for him in the dirt with a stick. The taste preferences of my species, sweet, I had discovered, was universal. Bitter was apparently an Earth aberration. The way my bioluminescence shifted and what the different colors meant. He cataloged these with the quiet attention he gave everything, and he never used the knowledge as leverage, never pointed it out in the moments when it might have been cruel to do so. On the day I showed him the stars, the real ones, the ones I had grown up with, projected in miniature above my palm using the emergency beacon's secondary function, a feature designed for navigation that I had repurposed into something else entirely. He went very still. "That's where you're from," he said. "That cluster there," I indicated with my finger. 60 million light years. "And you've been here for 11 weeks now." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you lonely?" I considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "I was," I said. "I'm less so now." He looked at me. His expression did the complicated thing again, moving through stages, arriving somewhere careful and chosen. "Good," he said softly. "Just that, just good." And my hands were gold again. I should have expected it. Looking back with the clarity of distance, I can see every sign I missed. The subtle wrongness that began on a Tuesday, 3 months into my forest exile, when I walked to the stream in the early morning and found footprints that were not mine and not Eli's. Too precise, too evenly spaced. Scouts. My father had sent scouts. Not soldiers, not yet. Scouts first, to confirm the location, to assess whether I had made contact with any indigenous population, to determine whether my exile had produced the desired result. I knew the protocol. I had learned it as part of my command education. I had 3 days at most before the scout report reached the Thavari throne hall, perhaps 5 before a secondary contact was dispatched. That secondary contact would not be gentle. It was not the physical danger that seized me when I understood what I was looking at. It was Eli. He would come on Thursday. He always came on Thursday. And if my father's people were watching the clearing, if they saw him with me, spoke to him, identified him as someone I had allowed into my confidence, My father had dealt with problematic contacts before. I had been told once that the word for it in the sovereign's court was resolution. I had never let myself think too hard about what that meant. I was thinking very hard about it now. I moved camp immediately, broke down the lean-to, buried the fire pit, scattered the markers. It took most of the day. By evening I was 2 kilometers deeper into the forest, in a location that would require knowing the specific trails to find, and I was sitting in the dark with my emergency beacon in my hands. I could activate the beacon's primary function, declare my position, summon transport. I would be taken back to Velarath. There would be no choice in it. The moment the signal went out, the pickup was automated. And I would be back in the court, back in the throne hall, back in a position where my father would determine once again what I was and was not allowed to be. Or I could do nothing. Stay hidden. Let the scouts find the abandoned camp. Let them report back, she's gone, we lost the trail, it'll take time to reacquire. Buy more time. But doing nothing meant Eli would arrive on Thursday and find the clearing empty. Would search. Might call for help, a missing person, authorities, a search of the forest. Which would make him visible? Which would make him findable? I could not let my silence endanger him. I sat with this for a long time. Then I did something I had not done since I arrived on Earth. I made a decision that had nothing to do with politics, and nothing to do with what I owed my title, my bloodline, my father's name. I went to find Eli. He was in the city. I had never been to the city, I had not dared, the bioluminescence being what it was, the risk being what it was, but I had his address from a piece of mail he had once showed me, a letter from a research publisher with his name on the envelope, and I had committed it to memory with the trained precision of a cadet who had passed her navigation exams with full marks. The city was. Overwhelming was not a sufficient word. The noise, the density of humans, the layered smell of food and fuel and bodies and something electric, the way the artificial light threw everything into a flatness that erased depth and shadow. I moved through it with my hands in my pockets and my head down, and my bioluminescence held at the strictest possible control, which meant I was holding my own emotional state on a very tight leash, which meant I was experiencing all of it twice, once through my senses, and once through the effort of not reacting. I found his building, climbed the stairs, knocked. The door opened and Eli looked at me for one moment, taking in the controlled tension in my face, the contained light along my cheekbones, the fact that I had just walked through a city I had never navigated for reasons I had not yet explained, and then he stepped aside and said, "Come in." Not "What are you doing here?" Not "How did you find me?" Not "This is unexpected." Just "Come in." I came in. I told him everything in the space of 10 minutes, the footprints, the scouts, the protocol, the timeline. I told him what my father's secondary contacts were capable of. I told him that I would not let him be harmed because of me, which meant I needed him to know the danger so that he could stay away from the forest, stay away from me, stay away from anything that might make him visible to people who resolved complications with quiet efficiency. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "So what's your plan?" I blinked. "My plan," I said slowly, "was to warn you." Right in after that. I stopped. I hadn't fully considered after that. Okay. He moved to his desk, pulled out the notebook, began writing, not distractedly, purposefully. "We have 3 days. What do we know about how they communicate? What are the vulnerabilities in the scout reporting protocol?" I stared at him. "Eli. This is not your problem to solve." He looked up from the notebook. His expression was even and direct, and contained a particular quality that I had come to recognize over the months as the one he only wore when he was saying something he considered non-negotiable. "Saravin," he said, I have been sitting in that forest with you every week for 3 months. I have heard about Velarath and your father and the 11 years of falsified records, and the moment you stood in that throne hall and told the truth. I have watched you learn to make fire from scratch and identify edible plants and build a shelter and find water and survive completely alone on a planet you've never been to before. He paused. You are the most remarkable person I have ever met. The planet of origin is not actually the thing that makes you remarkable. He looked back down at the notebook. So, the vulnerabilities in the Scout reporting protocol. Walk me through it. My bioluminescence. I couldn't control it, not in that moment. Gold, full, warm, uncontrolled gold, brighter than I had been since I left Velarath, brighter, maybe, than I had been since before that. He looked up, saw it, and for the first time in 3 months his careful neutral expression softened into something unguarded. Yeah, he said quietly, as if the gold had confirmed something he had been sitting with for a while. Eli. Walk me through the protocol, he said again gently. We can do the other thing after. Right now we have 3 days. I sat down across from him. I walked him through the protocol. We worked through the night. The solution, when we found it, was elegant in the way that solutions built under pressure sometimes were, using the beacon's tertiary communications function, not the emergency signal, not the navigation light, but the diplomatic frequency, designed for exactly the scenario of a Velarath noble making contact with an uncontacted world's authorities, to transmit a formal status report directly to the Confederacy's diplomatic corps, bypassing my father's office entirely. A status report filed through official channels could not be suppressed, could not be quietly resolved. It would, the moment it landed in the core system, become a matter of public record. My location, my status, the nature of my exile. The reason for it. The falsified records I had memorized before I left, the ones I had been carrying in my head for 11 weeks like a stone in my chest, would be attached. It was not a guarantee of safety. It was, however, substantially harder to quietly resolve than one exiled princess alone in a forest. I looked at Eli across his desk at 4 in the morning, the city going quiet outside his windows, the notebook between us covered in working diagrams and signal frequencies. If I transmit this, I said, my father will know where I am, he will know what I've done. I stopped. There is no going back to the forest after this, there is no quiet. I know, he said. I want to be clear about what I'm choosing. I want to choose it clearly. Okay, he said. I looked at him for a long moment. I choose this, I said. I activated the diplomatic frequency. I transmitted the report. It took 4 days. Eli's apartment had a couch, which he gave me without discussion, and a coffee maker which became relevant on day 2 when I acknowledged, somewhat against my will, that the bitterness had become, if not enjoyable, then at least necessary. He was right about that. It was an acquired taste. He was right about a lot of things. On the 2nd day, the Confederacy Diplomatic Corps sent an acknowledgement. On the 3rd day, the acknowledgement was followed by a formal inquiry. On the 4th day, at 6 in the evening, while Eli was reading and I was watching the sky go dark outside his window, looking for stars that were still the wrong ones, my emergency beacon chimed. Not the automated pickup signal. A voice message. I looked at the beacon for a long time before I played it. It was not my father's voice. It was my mother's. I had not heard her voice in 4 months. She said, "The inquiry has reached the full council. Your files have been verified. Your father has been called before review. I do not know what comes next, Saravan, but I want you to know what you did was right. It was always right. I am sorry I was not braver." A pause. Come home when you are ready, if you are ready. There is no demand in this. Only an invitation. I sat with the message for a long time. Eli from across the room said nothing. He had learned over these months the difference between a silence that wanted company and a silence that wanted space. He gave me the space. When I finally looked up, he was watching me with that careful, quiet expression, the one that held warmth behind its steadiness, the one that I had been cataloging for months without fully acknowledging what I was cataloging. She said I could come home, I said. I heard, he paused. Are you going to? A very simple question, extraordinarily complicated answer. I thought about the throne hall and the silver trees and the 7 moons. I thought about 11 years of falsified records and a court full of people who had chosen silence. I thought about what my mother's voice had sounded like, saying I am sorry I was not braver. I thought about the work that was still to be done, the colonies that needed resources, the records that needed correcting, the systems that had been built on a lie for over a decade. I thought about the fact that I had stood in a clearing 3 months ago and said I did not know who I was without the titles. I knew better now. I was someone who told the truth when it mattered. I was someone who had survived 64 days alone and then walked through a city I had never navigated to protect a person who had given me nothing but honesty and coffee, and the specific, radical gift of sitting beside me, without asking me to be anything other than what I was. I was someone who had, somewhere between the wrong stars and the forest floor and 4 in the morning over a notebook full of diplomatic frequencies, learned what it felt like to choose a thing clearly. I looked at Eli. I think I have to go back, I said. There's work to do there that only I can do. The records, the colonies, the accounting, someone has to shepherd all of it, and the someone most likely to do it correctly is me. I know, he said quietly. I don't want to go, I said. A different kind of honesty, harder. His expression moved through its stages and arrived somewhere open. I don't want you to go, he said, for what it's worth. It's worth quite a lot, I said. We sat with that for a moment. The Confederacy, I said slowly, has a formal diplomatic observer program for uncontacted worlds approaching contact readiness. It's been used before cultural liaison positions, long-term embedded observation. Eli looked at me. It would mean living on Velarath, I said. For extended periods, it would mean, I paused. It would mean seeing the Arath Wood and the 7 moons and the stars in the right configuration for once. It would mean leaving Earth, he said. Yes. He was quiet. For extended periods, he said. Yes. He looked at his notebook, looked at his window, looked at me. I've always wanted to see more stars, he said. My hands were gold. Brighter than ever. Here is what I want you to take from this story, if you take nothing else. I was banished by my father with nothing. No title, no court, no rank, no resources, nothing but the emergency beacon on my wrist and the memorized evidence of his crimes and the 19 years of training I had not yet had cause to use. He sent me here to learn what it meant to be nothing. I learned something else. I learned that a title is not a self, that a throne is not a foundation, that the most important choices, the ones that define the shape of a life, are rarely made in throne halls or diplomatic chambers or at command desks on flagship vessels. They're made in forest clearings at 4 in the morning, across notebooks full of frequencies and options and contingency plans, next to someone who brings you a second cup of coffee and does not ask you to explain yourself, and calls you remarkable like it is simply a fact and not a kindness. I went back to Velarath. I did the work. My father was removed from the sovereignty. The records were corrected. The colonies received their resources. And Eli Marin, researcher, writer, man who came to a forest every week, because it was the only place the noise in his head went quiet, became the first formal cultural liaison between the Velarath Confederation and Earth. He learned our stars. I showed him every constellation I had grown up naming. He brought a second cup of coffee to every one of them. Some tastes, it turns out, you acquire because you want to. Some things you choose clearly. And